Have you ever wondered how a simple laugh can destroy an entire life? I discovered this in the worst possible way. Good afternoon, my dear friends. My name is Elaine Thompson Miller. I'm 78 years old, and today I'm going to share with you a story that I've kept in my heart for a long time. Before I begin, I'd like to ask those of you watching to give me a little support and hit the like button. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe so you don't miss any stories like this one, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side. I was born in 1947 in a small town called Riverdale, where everybody knew everybody. It was a simple place, but full of good, hard-working people. My father owned a small general store in the town square, and my mother took care of the house and 6 children. I was the second oldest. Our life wasn't easy, but it was honest. Daddy always said, "Honor won't fill your belly, but it'll let you sleep with a clear conscience." That's how I was raised, learning that character is worth more than any wealth. I met Frank when I was 17. He came to town to work at the paper mill that had opened not long ago. He was a handsome young man with a different way of speaking. He was from the city and seemed to know things about the world that we couldn't even imagine. Right from the start, he caught my attention with that steady gaze and the broad smile he'd show when he came to buy cigarettes at my father's store. "Good morning, miss," he would say, tipping his hat. And I, silly like any girl that age, would feel my heart race. In those days, a proper girl didn't talk to a young man without parental supervision. So, our courtship began with shy glances and smiles exchanged at my father's store. It was Ted, my older brother, who eventually befriended Frank. And only then, after a few months, did he get permission to visit me at home, always on Sundays after church, sitting on the porch under my mother's watchful eyes as she pretended to sew while monitoring us. We dated for 2 years. I remember as if it were yesterday, the day he asked for my hand in marriage. He came all dressed up, hair slicked back with Brill-Cream, bringing a bouquet of daisies, the cheapest flowers, but they were my favorites, and that touched my heart. My father put on a tough face, but deep down he was happy for me. After all, Frank had a good job at the mill as a machine operator. He could give me a better life than we had there. We got married in 1966. It was a simple ceremony at the town church, followed by a small reception in my parents' backyard. My dress was made by Mrs. Jenkins, the best seamstress in town at that time. It wasn't luxurious, but to me, it was the most beautiful dress in the world. I felt like a princess walking into the church on my father's arm, seeing Frank waiting for me at the altar. Our first house was small, just 2 rooms, a bedroom and a living room with a wood stove. The bathroom, as was common in those days, was outside, but to us, it seemed like a palace. I cleaned it, fixed it up, put up some cotton curtains my mother gave me as a present. I planted some flowers in the small yard. It was simple, but it was our little corner of the world. The first years were happy. Frank would leave early for work and return in the late afternoon. I took care of the house, made lunch that he carried in an aluminum lunch pail. At night, we would sit at our doorstep, like all the neighbors did, talking about the day. Sometimes he would bring me a piece of taffy or a ribbon for my hair, small joys that meant a lot. Our first son, Anthony, who everyone soon called Tony, was born in 1968. It was a difficult birth, at home with Mrs. Patterson, the midwife. Frank was so nervous that he spent the whole night pacing back and forth in the living room, smoking one cigarette after another. When he finally heard the baby's cry, he cried too. He came into the bedroom, looked at me, all sweaty and tired, holding that little red thing that was screaming, and said, "Look what we made, Elaine. He's the most beautiful boy in the world, and that's how we started our family." Frank proved to be a good father. He would come home from work and immediately want to hold Tony, play with him, make the boy laugh. On weekends, we would visit my parents or his parents, who lived in the neighboring town. It was a simple life, but everything was fine. We were building something together. It was around 1972, when Tony was already 4 years old, that I started to notice changes in Frank. Small things at first. He started coming home later from work. He said he was doing overtime. Sometimes he'd come back smelling of alcohol, but not too much, just enough for me to notice. When I asked, he said he'd only had a small drink with colleagues. During this time, he was promoted at the mill. He started working more directly with the office staff. He wasn't just working with the machines anymore. He began to dress better, bought some new shirts, said he needed to make a good impression on the bosses. I was happy for him, of course. It was an opportunity for us to improve our lives. With the better salary, we managed to buy some new furniture. A real double bed to replace the mattress we had on the floor. A refrigerator, something many neighbors still didn't have. I remember the joy of making popsicles for Tony in the summer. Simple things that seemed luxurious to us. But along with these improvements, something began to change between us. Frank was spending more time away from home. When he returned, he seemed distant, too tired to talk. At night, after we had dinner and I put Tony to bed, he would say, "I'm so tired. I think I'll sleep on the couch tonight so I don't disturb you with my snoring." The first time I thought it was strange, but he insisted that he was snoring too much and didn't want to disturb my sleep. At first, it was just once in a while. Soon it became almost every night. "I'll sleep on the couch," he would say, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I started to feel lonely in that bed that was too big just for me. I tried to talk to him about it, but Frank always had an excuse. He was tired, had back pain, needed to wake up early, and didn't want to wake me up too. It was during this time that I noticed other changes as well. He started taking better care of himself. He spent more time in the shower, used aftershave lotion, something he rarely did before. His clothes sometimes came home with a different smell, which wasn't the smell of the mill, nor of the bar where he occasionally had a beer. It was a sweet, feminine perfume. When I questioned him about this, he got angry for the first time. "What nonsense, Elaine. It's perfume they spray in the office, fancy people stuff. You're imagining things." And he left, slamming the door, staying out until late that day. I started paying more attention. I noticed that he would smile when reading certain notes that he would quickly hide when I approached, or when answering a message that some colleague brought. He started avoiding Sunday visits to my family, always with an excuse. He was tired, he had to take care of something, he needed to do some side job to earn extra money. Tony also felt the change. "Dad, let's play catch," he would ask. And many times he would receive a, "Not today, son, I'm tired." The little boy's eyes would fill with disappointment, and it broke my heart. I tried to make up for it, giving the boy more attention, inventing games, telling stories at bedtime, but nothing replaced his father's presence. And deep down, I was starting to feel a fear that I couldn't name. That's when I discovered I was pregnant again. When I told Frank, I expected to see the same sparkle in his eyes that he had when he found out about Tony. But what I saw was an almost panicked look, followed by a forced smile and a hug without enthusiasm. "That's good, Elaine. Another child." He said this like someone receiving news of a bill to pay. That hurt me deeply. I cried in secret many nights while he slept on the couch. Now it was practically every day. "I'll sleep on the couch so I don't disturb you. You need to rest." "You're pregnant," he would say, as if he were doing me a favor. But I just felt increasingly alone. My belly grew, and with it grew the distance between us. Frank hardly ever commented about the baby, didn't touch my belly to feel the movements like he did when I was expecting Tony. He worked more and more, came home later and later. On Sundays, he frequently went out to take care of things or help a friend, returning only at night. I swallowed my tears, tried to convince myself that it was just a difficult phase. After all, another child meant more expenses, more responsibility. I tried to believe that, but deep down, I knew there was something more, something I was afraid to discover. Here I am, telling all of this to you so many years later. And I still feel a tightness in my chest when remembering those days. But the worst was yet to come. And everything changed on a hot night in January 1973, when I was in my 7th month of pregnancy. It was January 1973, a particularly hot summer, those stifling nights when no breeze came through the window. I was 7 months pregnant, feeling heavy, swollen, and the heat only made everything worse. Sleeping was already difficult with a belly that size. Imagine with the suffocating heat. On that specific night, Frank had arrived later than usual. He ate dinner quietly, barely looked at Tony, who kept insisting on showing him a drawing he had made at kindergarten. After dinner, as always, he said, "I'll sleep on the couch tonight." That phrase that I already hated so much. He didn't even wait for me to respond. He grabbed his pillow and went. I lay down alone in bed, as I had grown accustomed to doing. The baby in my belly was restless, kicking, as if wanting to keep me awake too. I ran my hand over my belly, trying to calm that little life growing inside me. "Calm down, my dear. Calm down," I whispered softly. I must have dozed off at some point, because I woke up startled with a terrible thirst. The clock on the wall marked 2:30 in the morning. I got up with difficulty. Any woman who has been pregnant knows how hard it is to move around in the last months. I walked slowly to the door, trying not to make noise. I passed through the dark living room and noticed that the couch where Frank usually slept was empty. I thought maybe he had gone to the bathroom in the backyard. I continued to the kitchen. I took a drink of cool water from the clay filter. That's when I heard it. A laugh. A woman's laugh coming from the backyard. It wasn't just any laugh. It was soft, seductive, young. A laugh that definitely didn't belong in that house. My heart raced. A chill ran down my spine despite the heat. I was paralyzed for a few seconds, the glass of water trembling in my hand. Then, very quietly, I approached the kitchen window that faced the backyard. I pulled back the curtain just enough to peek outside. The moon was full that night, illuminating the yard enough for me to see. And there was Frank, leaning against the back gate, talking with a woman. I couldn't see her face clearly, but I noticed she was young and wearing a light-colored dress. They were close, very close. His hand rested on her arm, in an intimate gesture that made me feel as if someone had punched me in the stomach. The girl said something I couldn't hear, and laughed again. That same laugh that had awakened me. Frank smiled in a way he hadn't smiled at me for a long time, a genuine smile, full of life. Then he took something from his pocket, a small package, and gave it to her. The girl opened it, exclaimed something that seemed to be joy, and leaned in to kiss him on the cheek, very close to the mouth. I backed away from the window, feeling my world crumble. The suspicions I had been trying to push away for months were confirmed there before my eyes. The thirst was gone, but a terrible nausea took its place. I stumbled back to the bedroom, closed the door without making a sound, and collapsed on the bed. I cried silently, with my face buried in the pillow to muffle the sobs. The baby in my belly stirred, as if feeling my anguish. I ran my hand over my belly, trying to calm him and myself. "Everything will be all right," I lied, not knowing if I would ever believe those words. I don't know how long I stayed there crying. At some point, I heard the front door open and close gently. Frank coming back inside, thinking I was asleep, not knowing he had just broken my heart to pieces. I wiped away my tears, took a deep breath, and decided I would confront him in the morning. I could no longer pretend it wasn't happening. I pretended to be asleep when he came to check if I was still in the bedroom. Then I heard him settle in the living room. I spent the rest of the night awake, reliving every moment of the past few months, every excuse, every "I'll sleep on the couch" every time he came home late or left without explanation. It all made sense now. Painfully clear. When the first rays of sunlight came through the window, I got up determined. I prepared breakfast, as I always did. I woke up Tony for school, helped him get dressed. I acted normally in front of him. Children notice everything, and I didn't want my son to notice that something was wrong. After our neighbor passed by to take him to kindergarten along with his son, I returned to the kitchen, where Frank was having his coffee, reading an old newspaper, as if nothing had happened. "Who was that girl in the backyard last night?" I asked directly. My voice was firmer than I had expected. Frank froze, the cup suspended in the air. His eyes met mine, and in them I saw something I had never seen before: fear mixed with guilt. "What are you talking about, Elaine?" He tried to change the subject, but his voice trembled a little. "I saw you, Frank, in the backyard in the middle of the night. I saw you giving a present to her. I heard her laugh." My voice faltered at that moment, tears threatening to return. But I swallowed the cry, determined not to show myself as weak. He put the cup on the table, sighed deeply. For a second I thought he would deny it, that he would make up some excuse, but then his shoulders fell, defeated. "It's Debbie," he said finally. "She works as a secretary for Mr. Hudson, the chief engineer at the mill." Debbie. Now the ghost had a name, a young secretary, like in the radio soap operas I used to listen to. Only this time, I was the betrayed wife, not a distant character. "How long?" I asked, feeling a knot in my throat. He hesitated. "A few months." "Is that why you've been sleeping on the couch, so you can go out and meet her when I'm asleep?" Frank didn't answer, but his silence was answer enough. I collapsed into a chair, feeling the weight of it all. 7 years of marriage, 1 child, another on the way, and he was throwing it all away because of a young girl from the office. "What did you give her last night?" I asked, remembering the small package. He hesitated again. "A small brooch. It wasn't expensive." But I knew that was a lie. We had difficulty paying the bills at the end of the month, but he had money to buy presents for his mistress. I thought about the times I had to economize at the grocery store, the clothes I mended for Tony, while he spent our hard-earned money on her. "Are you in love with her?" The question I most feared asking. He looked away, and at that moment, I knew the answer before he even spoke. "It happened, Elaine. I didn't plan it, but yes, I care for her." Each word was like a stab. I remembered our wedding, how he had sworn to love and respect me forever before God and everyone, how we had dreamed together about our family, our little house, our future, and now it all crumbled before my eyes. "And the baby? And Tony?" I asked, my hand instinctively over my belly. "I don't know, Elaine. I don't know what to do. I didn't want you to find out this way." "How did you want me to find out then? Or did you intend to deceive me forever?" Anger was beginning to replace the initial sadness. He didn't respond. We sat there in silence, like 2 strangers. The man in front of me no longer seemed like the boy I fell in love with, the one who made me feel special, who promised that we would build a life together. He was a stranger, someone I no longer recognized. "Are you going to end it with her?" I asked, finally, a last thread of hope still clinging to my heart. He hesitated. "I don't know if I can, Elaine." And there, in that hesitation, I had my answer. He would not choose our family. He would not choose me. He chose that girl with her easy laugh and youth that I no longer had. I stood up, my legs trembling, and left the kitchen without saying anything more. What more was there to say? He had made his choice, and it wasn't me, nor our children. It was that young girl with the easy laugh and youth that I no longer had. The following weeks were a blur of pain and confusion. Frank continued at home, sleeping on the couch, going out more and more. I, in my wounded pride, didn't tell anyone, not even my mother or my sisters. I was ashamed. In those days, a betrayed woman carried a mark as if it were her fault that her husband looked for another. I began to prepare for the worst. If he was going to leave me, I needed to have a way to support myself and my children. That's when I sought out Mrs. Jenkins, the seamstress who had made my wedding dress. I always had a good hand for sewing, but I never thought of making it a profession. I asked her to teach me more, to let me help in her workshop during the hours when Tony was at school. Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly widow who had no children, welcomed me with kindness. Perhaps she sensed my desperation behind the request. She taught me how to make patterns, to sew different types of fabric, to make finer finishes. I learned quickly. My hands seemed to know what to do, as if sewing were a dormant talent within me. Meanwhile, my belly was growing. The small life inside me seemed stronger than my own pain, forcing me to move forward. For Tony, I tried to keep up appearances. I told him that his father was working a lot, that it was a phase. But children sense when something is wrong. He became quieter, less cheerful. In March 1973, my daughter Celeste was born. It was an easier birth than the first, but lonelier. Frank was there, but he seemed distant, as if he were just fulfilling an obligation. I didn't see in his eyes the sparkle I had seen when Tony was born. He held the girl briefly, said she was beautiful, and soon handed her back to me. Those first days with a newborn are always difficult. Sleepless nights, recovery from childbirth, breastfeeding. But this time, I was doing it all practically alone. Frank would arrive late, leave early, avoid being at home on weekends. When Celeste cried at night, it was me who got up, even exhausted. He continued to sleep in the living room, now using the baby's crying as an excuse. He said he needed to rest for work the next day. These were hard times, very hard, but something in me changed with Celeste's birth. Looking at that innocent little face, so dependent on me, something strengthened in my core. I couldn't afford the luxury of falling apart. I had 2 children now who needed me, who depended on my strength. And so, cradling Celeste in the early hours, while everyone slept, I made a decision. I would not continue living that lie. I would not raise my children in a house where the father lived a double life, where I was consumed by sadness day after day. I deserved more. My children deserved more. When Celeste turned 3 months old, on a night when Frank came home particularly late, with that same feminine perfume that I knew well by now, I decided it was time. I waited for him to settle in the living room, and then I went there, with Celeste asleep in my arms. "We need to talk," I said, my voice calm, but determined. "This can't continue like this." He looked at me, surprised by my direct approach. We hadn't really talked for weeks. "What do you mean?" "You know very well. You're still seeing that girl, aren't you? Debbie." He didn't deny it, just nodded slightly, as if he were too tired to lie. "You need to choose, Frank. Either you stay with your real family, with no more secret meetings, no more lies, or you leave." The words came out firmer than I expected, surprising us both. The old Frank would have gotten angry, would have shouted, perhaps, but the man before me just sighed, as if relieved that I had finally said what we both knew was inevitable. "She wants me to move in with her, Elaine, for a while now. She's tired of being the other woman." His frankness caught me off guard. I expected more denial, more excuses, but there was the raw truth, finally. "And what do you want?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. He hesitated, looked at Celeste sleeping in my arms, and for a second I saw a flicker of something, remorse perhaps, in his eyes. "I didn't want to hurt you, or the children." "But you did," I replied, surprising myself with the lack of tears. It seemed I had already cried all I could. "And you will continue to hurt us if you stay here pretending we're a family while your heart is somewhere else." He didn't respond. He just sat there, on the edge of the couch, where he had been sleeping for months, looking at his own hands. "I'm going to my parents' house tomorrow," I declared. "I'm taking the children with me." He raised his head, surprised. "Are you going to tell them about us?" The shame in his voice was palpable. He was concerned with what others would think of him, with his reputation in the small town where everyone knew each other. "I'm going to tell the truth," I replied simply. "That it didn't work out, that you chose another path." I returned to the bedroom, leaving him there with his thoughts. I lay down with Celeste beside me, in the improvised cradle, and, for the first time in months, I felt a strange peace. The decision was made. The future was uncertain, scary even, but at least I would no longer live in a lie. And so, my dear friends, as little Celeste slept innocently, I closed my eyes, not knowing exactly what awaited me, but certain that the laugh I heard on that hot January night had changed my destiny forever. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. My eyes burned, but my heart was lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The decision was made. I packed some of my and the children's clothes in an old cardboard suitcase that we kept under the bed. There wasn't much to take. A few pieces of clothing, Celeste's diapers, the one-eyed teddy bear that Tony couldn't sleep without. When Frank left for work, he avoided looking me in the eyes. Before going out the door, he paused for a moment, as if he wanted to say something, but ended up leaving in silence. His shoulders slumped like those of a much older man. For a brief moment, I felt sorry for him. Then, I remembered her laugh, the perfume on his clothes, the nights I spent alone, and pity just transformed into determination. I waited until the time when our neighbor would pass by to take Tony to kindergarten. When he arrived, I explained that I would take my son myself that day. I put Celeste in the improvised stroller that my father had made with wood scraps. I took Tony by the hand, and we left. "Where are we going, Mom?" asked my son, always observant. "We're going to Grandma Emma and Grandpa Joe's house. We're going to stay there for a few days." "And Dad?" That simple question made me swallow hard. How do you explain to a 5-year-old child that his father has chosen another family? "Dad will stay here, son. He has a lot of work right now." The boy nodded, accepting the explanation with that innocence that only children have. I held his little hand tighter, as if I could protect him from the pain that I knew would come later. The walk to my parents' house never seemed so long. The April sun was already strong, and I was sweating, pushing Celeste's stroller on the dirt roads. Some neighbors looked at me curiously as I passed. In a small town like ours, a woman leaving home with her children and a suitcase was news. When I finally arrived, my mother was in the yard, hanging clothes on the line. When she saw me, she immediately knew something was wrong. Mothers always know. "What happened, honey?" she asked, looking from the suitcase to my tired face, to the children. "Can I stay here a few days, Mom? Me and the children?" She didn't ask anything more at that moment, just nodded, took the suitcase from my hand, and guided me inside. This was my childhood home, the place where I always felt safe. The same whitewashed walls, the dirt floor in the kitchen, the smell of coffee on the wood stove. It was as if time hadn't passed. That night, after the children were asleep, I told everything to my mother. About the "I'll sleep on the couch," about the laugh in the yard, about Debbie. I told her through tears that I had decided to leave Frank, that I couldn't live that way anymore, pretending everything was fine while my marriage was falling apart. My mother listened to everything in silence, her lips pressed into a thin line. When I finished, she held my hands in hers. Calloused hands from so much work, but which always brought comfort. "You did what you had to do, daughter. A woman can't accept being disrespected like that. Your father and I are here. You and the children will always have a roof." The simplicity of those words brought immense relief. I was so afraid of judgment, of the shame of a failed marriage. In those days, a separated woman was viewed differently, as if carrying a stain. But there, in that simple kitchen, under the dim light of a lantern, my mother showed me that family love was stronger than any social convention. The following days were about adaptation. My father, a man of few words, didn't ask questions, just gave a pat on my shoulder and said, "This house will always be your house, daughter." Mom made a small bed for Tony in the little back room where I slept with Celeste. She made a small cradle for her granddaughter with a wooden box. The news spread quickly through the town, as was to be expected. I felt the looks when I went to the general store. I heard the whispers. "Frank's wife, Elaine, has returned to her parents' house," they said. "Seems like he left her for a young girl from the city." Each word hurt like an open wound, but I kept my head held high for myself and for my children. I wasn't ashamed of my decision. The shame was his, who broke his promises, who abandoned his family. A week after I had left home, Frank appeared at my parents' house. He was shaved, dressed in his best shirt. He brought a package of candy for Tony. My father received him at the door coldly, but let him in. After all, he was the father of his grandchildren. We talked in the yard, away from the children's ears. He seemed nervous, restless. "I came to see how you all are," he said, as if it were a casual visit. "We're adjusting," I replied, keeping my voice firm. He looked at the ground, then at me. "Elaine, I'm sorry things came to this point." I didn't respond. What could I say? That it was okay? It wasn't okay. "I want to help with the children. I can give some money every month." I nodded. The children would need everything: food, clothes, school supplies. I couldn't refuse out of pride. "Thank you. They are your children too." A heavy silence fell between us. So many years together, and now we were almost strangers, talking with formality. "I'm living with Debbie now," he finally said, avoiding my gaze. "We rented a room near the mill." The news didn't surprise me, but still, I felt as if something broke inside me. It was the last nail in the coffin of our marriage. "I hope you'll be happy," I managed to say, surprising myself with the sincerity in the words. I didn't wish him ill. I just wanted to move forward, build a new life for myself and for my children. He left after playing a bit with Tony. I saw the confusion in my son's eyes when his father said goodbye. He didn't understand why we weren't all going home together, but children have an incredible ability to adapt. Soon, the routine at my parents' house became the new normal for him. It was during this period that Mrs. Jenkins, the seamstress, became my savior. She knew about my situation, like everyone in town, and appeared one day at my parents' house. "Elaine, do you still want to learn more about sewing?" she asked directly, as always. "I need an assistant in the workshop. The work has increased, and these old hands can't handle everything anymore." I looked at her with gratitude. I knew it was more a gesture of kindness than a real need. Mrs. Jenkins was the best seamstress in the region. She didn't need help, but she was offering me a job opportunity, independence. "Yes, Mrs. Jenkins, I appreciate it very much." We arranged that I would go to her workshop 3 times a week, on the mornings when Tony was at school. Celeste was still small, so I would take her with me. My mother offered to take care of her while I worked, but Mrs. Jenkins insisted that I bring the girl. "A child doesn't get in the way," she said. "I have the perfect little corner to put her cradle while you work." And so my new life began. In the morning, I would take Tony to school, then I would continue with Celeste to Mrs. Jenkins' workshop. There I learned much more than sewing. I learned about business, about how to deal with clients, about pricing the work. Mrs. Jenkins was strict but patient. "This hem isn't straight, Elaine. Undo it and do it again." Or, "This finishing needs to be perfect. The client is paying for perfection." I absorbed every lesson, every criticism, every compliment. My hands, which already had some natural ability with needle and thread, were becoming increasingly precise, more confident. I started doing simple work: hems, adjustments, buttons. Over time, Mrs. Jenkins began entrusting me with more complex pieces: dresses for First Communion, suits for weddings. She taught me to take measurements, to create patterns, to adapt models from the magazines that came from the city. The money that Frank gave for the children was little and irregular. I soon realized that I couldn't count on him. Sometimes he would appear with a toy for Tony, a little bow for Celeste's hair, but the financial commitment took second place. I learned from an acquaintance that he was already talking about having children with Debbie, a new family, while he could barely support the first. But I didn't let myself be discouraged. With the money I earned at the workshop, complemented by what my parents gave me, despite my protests, I managed to keep my children fed, dressed, and in school. It wasn't easy. There were nights when I cried in secret after everyone was asleep, exhausted from work, worried about the future, but I never allowed myself to give up. A year after I started working with Mrs. Jenkins, she called me for a serious conversation. We were alone in the workshop, finishing a wedding dress for the pharmacist's daughter. "Elaine, I'm getting old," she said, adjusting her glasses on her nose. These hands are not the same anymore, and my eyes no longer see the details as before. I protested, saying that she was still the best seamstress I knew, that her hands created magic with the fabrics. It's not false modesty, girl. It's the truth of life. We all age. She paused, looking at me with a mixture of affection and assessment. I've been watching your work. You have talent. More than talent, you have dedication. That's what makes a great seamstress. I felt my face flush with the unexpected compliment. Mrs. Jenkins wasn't one to distribute praise easily. I'm thinking about retiring, not now, but soon, and I would like you to take over the workshop when I'm gone. I was speechless. That small workshop on Main Street was more than a workplace, it was an institution. All the brides in the region, the debutantes, the bridesmaids, came to Mrs. Jenkins for their special dresses. It was a huge responsibility. Mrs. Jenkins, I don't know if I'm ready for that. She smiled, that wise smile of someone who has seen a lot of life. Nobody is ever ready, Elaine. We only discover we can do something after we do it. Wasn't it like that when you left home with 2 small children? You weren't ready, but you did what needed to be done. She was right. Life rarely asks us if we're ready for its challenges. It just puts them in our path, and it's up to us to face them or run away. I'll think about this as a plan for the future, continued Mrs. Jenkins. Meanwhile, I want you to start taking on more responsibilities here, attending to clients alone, making estimates, deciding on deadlines. I need to know that you can handle everything before passing the baton. That night, I returned to my parents' house, with my head buzzing with ideas. Celeste, now almost 2 years old, was asleep in my arms. Tony walked beside me, telling me about his day at school. I looked at my children, and for the first time since I left home, I felt a glimpse of a better future. That same week, we began to implement the changes in the workshop. Mrs. Jenkins introduced me to her oldest clients as her successor in training. Some looked at me with suspicion. After all, I was Elaine, who was left by her husband. But gradually, my work spoke for itself. Clients began to ask specifically for me for certain jobs. I remember one dress in particular that marked this transition. It was for the mayor's daughter who was getting married at the end of the year. A satin and lace dress with a long train inspired by a model she saw in an imported magazine. Mrs. Jenkins left me responsible for the project from start to finish. I worked on that dress like I had never worked on anything in my life. Nights awake, drawing, adapting the pattern, choosing materials. Each stitch, each detail had to be perfect. It was more than a dress. It was my declaration of competence, my proof that I could be more than the abandoned wife. When the bride came for the final fitting, the dress fit like a glove. She twirled in front of the mirror, emotional, while her mother cried with emotion beside her. Mrs. Jenkins observed from afar, a proud smile on her face. At that moment, I felt that I had found my place, my purpose. "It's the most beautiful dress I've ever seen," said the future bride, hugging me. "You have a gift, Mrs. Elaine." Mrs. Elaine. It was the first time someone called me that, with respect, recognizing my profession, not just my family status. I felt a warmth in my chest, a pride that I didn't know I could feel. The wedding was the event of the year in the town. Everyone commented on the bride's dress. Elaine's work, from Mrs. Jenkins's workshop, they said. My name began to circulate no longer as the abandoned wife, but as the seamstress with skillful hands, the one who transformed fabrics into dreams. At the end of 1975, about 2 years after I had left home with my children, I made another important decision. With the savings I had made, and with the help of a small loan that my father got from the bank, I rented a small space on the main street of town. It was smaller than Mrs. Jenkins's workshop. It needed renovation, but it was mine. The first space that truly belonged to me since I left the home I shared with Frank. Mrs. Jenkins, far from feeling betrayed, encouraged me. "This is how it should be," she said. "You need your own space, to build your own name. We'll continue to be friends and partners. With the help of my brothers and some friends, we painted the place, fixed the windows, installed shelves. I bought a used sewing machine, but in good condition. An investment that represented months of savings. My mother gave me some old chairs that were in the attic. My father made a wooden sign for the front of the store, Elaine's Atelier, custom sewing. On the day of the inauguration, a small crowd gathered. My family, friends, Mrs. Jenkins' clients, who came to wish me good luck. Celeste, now almost 3 years old, ran through the space, delighted with the colors of the exposed fabrics. Tony, at 7 years old, stood at the door, proud, receiving the people. Looking at that scene, I realized how far I had come since the night I heard that laugh in the backyard. From the devastated woman who left home with a cardboard suitcase and 2 small children, to the businesswoman who was inaugurating her own business. It hadn't been easy. There had been days of despair, nights of crying, moments when I thought I wouldn't make it. But there I was, proving to myself and to the world that I was capable. And just think, my dear friends, it all started with a laugh in the backyard and an "I'll sleep on the couch" that was repeated for many nights. Life has these things. What seems like a tragedy at the moment can be the beginning of a journey that takes us exactly where we were meant to be. The following years were of constant growth, both for my small business and for my children. My atelier quickly became known beyond the borders of our town. Ladies from neighboring towns began to come, sometimes traveling hours just to order a special dress or an outfit for an important occasion. I fondly remember how in 1978 I needed to hire my first assistant. Nancy was a young woman, newly married, with agile hands and attentive eyes. "I want to learn everything you can teach me, Mrs. Elaine," she told me on the first day. I smiled at hearing the Mrs. It still sounded strange to me, although I was already 31 years old and respected in the community. Teaching Nancy made me realize how much I myself had learned. Knowledge that I absorbed from Mrs. Jenkins, techniques I developed on my own, tricks I discovered after hours of work. It was gratifying to pass this knowledge on, to see another woman grow professionally. My atelier was no longer just a workplace, it had become a small meeting point. Clients would come for clothing fittings and end up staying for coffee, exchanging stories, sharing news. There, among fabrics and threads, a small community of women who supported each other was created. At home, things were also evolving. With the money from the atelier, I managed to rent a modest but comfortable little house near Tony's school. It was an immense joy to have our own roof again, to decorate the children's rooms the way they wanted, to plant my own flowers in the garden. Tony was growing fast, already almost 12 years old in 1980, becoming a studious and responsible boy. Celeste, at 7 years old, was pure energy and curiosity. Their relationship with their father continued, albeit sporadic. Frank would show up on birthdays, bring presents at Christmas, occasionally take them for an outing, but these visits were increasingly rare, especially after he had another child with Debbie. This was a difficult time for Tony. I remember him coming back from a meeting with his father, eyes downcast, with a sad expression. "What's wrong, son?" I asked, concerned. "Dad said I have a little brother now. He seems so happy with the new baby." I swallowed hard, feeling that old pain resurface. Not for me, but for my son, who felt as if he was being replaced. "Your father loves you, Tony. A new baby doesn't change that. It's like when Celeste was born. My love for you didn't decrease, it just grew to include her, too." He nodded, trying to understand with his childish mind something that many adults have difficulty processing. That night, as I watched him sleep, I promised myself that I would do everything so that my children would never feel less important or less loved. I continued investing in my business. In 1982, I managed to buy an electric sewing machine, a luxury at the time. Clients were impressed with the speed and precision of the work. In the same year, we expanded the atelier, renting the property next door to create an exclusive space for fittings and another for production. It was also at this time that I started offering sewing courses to other women. Many came asking, wanting to learn to make clothes for the family or even to start their own business. On Saturday afternoons, the atelier transformed into a small school. Seeing those women, some young, others already with grown children, learning a skill that could change their lives as it changed mine, brought an indescribable satisfaction. Mrs. Jenkins, now quite elderly, would occasionally come to visit the atelier. She would sit in a corner, observing everything with proud eyes. "You've gone beyond what I could have imagined, Elaine," she told me once. "You've transformed a trade into a true movement." Her words deeply moved me. In a way, it was true. The atelier had become more than a business. It was a place where women found independence, respect, and community. In 1984, I received the news of Mrs. Jenkins's passing. I cried as if I had lost a second mother. In many ways, she was exactly that. The woman who extended her hand to me when I needed it most, who believed in me when I myself doubted my ability. At the funeral, many women came to hug me, saying how Mrs. Jenkins always spoke of me with pride, how she considered me her greatest achievement. It was in this same year, on a rainy afternoon in May, that the past came knocking at my door in a way I would never have expected. I was at the atelier finishing a graduation dress when Nancy informed me that there was a man wanting to talk to me. "He looks down, Mrs. Elaine. He said he's an old acquaintance." As I raised my eyes from my work, I saw Frank standing at the door of the atelier. But it wasn't the Frank I remembered, the handsome and confident man I knew, nor even the distant husband of the last times together. It was a prematurely aged man, thin, with deep dark circles and clothes that seemed too big for his body. "Elaine," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Can I talk to you?" For a moment I was paralyzed. I hadn't seen him up close for almost 2 years, since Tony's 11th birthday. Our interactions had been limited to brief encounters when he came to pick up or drop off the children, increasingly rare. "Of course," I finally replied. "Let's go to the back. We can talk better there." I led him to a small room at the back of the atelier, where I usually held meetings with suppliers or special clients. Nancy brought us coffee, looking curiously at this man she didn't know, but who clearly had some history with me. "What can I do for you, Frank?" I asked when we were alone. He held the coffee cup with trembling hands. I noticed his fingers were yellowed from cigarettes, and there was an unnatural paleness to his face. "I wanted to see how you are," he said, looking around the room, admiring the expensive fabrics, the framed photographs of brides wearing my creations. "You did it, didn't you? Built all this on your own." There was a mixture of admiration and sadness in his voice that caught me off guard. "It wasn't easy," I replied, not knowing exactly where that conversation would lead us. "But yes, I'm fine. The atelier is doing well. The children, too. Tony tells me he's thinking about medicine. And Celeste can already read better than many older children." I nodded, feeling a warm pride in my chest when hearing about my children. "They're good kids, studious, responsible." An uncomfortable silence fell between us. We had exhausted the initial courtesies, and now the unasked question hung in the air. Why was he there? After so long. "Debbie left me," he said finally, his eyes fixed on the coffee in front of him. "She went away with the new engineer from the mill, took the boy." I felt a pang of déjà vu. History was repeating itself, but now with him in the role I had lived. I felt no joy at his misfortune, just a strange sense that life has its own sense of justice. "I'm sorry," I replied. And it was true. As much as he had hurt me, I didn't wish the pain of being abandoned, of having a child taken far away on anyone. "I lost my job at the mill too," he continued, his voice choked. "After Debbie left with the engineer, it became difficult to continue working there. The new boss didn't like me, said I caused problems. I ended up being fired." He paused, as if gathering courage for what would come next. "I'm working as a farmhand at Mr. Johnston's. It's not a bad job, but it pays little. I'm living in a small room in the back of the property. I tried to imagine Frank, who had always been so proud of his work at the mill, now as a simple farm worker. The fall had been great. "Why are you telling me this, Frank?" I finally asked, without beating around the bush. He raised his eyes, meeting mine for the first time since he entered the atelier. "I made the biggest mistake of my life when I left you and the children, Elaine. Not a day goes by that I don't regret it." I felt my heart race. A part of me, that naive young woman who was abandoned with 2 small children, had always dreamed of hearing these words. But the woman I had become knew they came too late. "Frank, the past is past. We've built separate lives. I have my business. The children are growing up well." I know, he interrupted, distressed. "I'm not here to ask that we get back together. I know it's too late for that. I just wanted to know if you could help me get a better job. You know, so many people now have so much influence in town." The reality of that visit hit me like a bucket of cold water. He wasn't coming in search of reconciliation or forgiveness. He was coming to ask for practical help, a job. "What do you know how to do besides the work at the mill?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "I know a bit of mechanics. I learned at the mill. I know how to drive a truck too. Got my license a few years ago." I thought for a moment. The husband of a client, owner of a trucking company, had recently mentioned that he needed drivers. "I can talk to Mr. Oliver from the trucking company. He's looking for drivers for deliveries in the region." "It's not an easy job. It's many hours on the road, but it pays better than farm work." His face lit up with a mixture of gratitude and relief. "Would you do that for me, after everything?" I looked at him, at the man I once loved, who made me suffer so much, but who also gave me 2 wonderful children, and indirectly the impulse to build the life I now had. "I'm not doing it for you, Frank. I'm doing it for our children. They deserve a father who can help them when they need it, who contributes to their education. And if for that you need a better job, then I'll do what I can." He nodded, understanding. For a moment I saw in him a glimpse of the man I knew, humble, grateful, aware of his errors. "Thank you, Elaine. You were always better than I deserved." When he left the atelier, I sat for a long time, reflecting on the strange paths that life takes us. 11 years ago, I was leaving home with 2 small children, destroyed by that man's betrayal. Now I was the one extending a hand to help him get back on his feet. It wasn't revenge nor complete forgiveness. It was just the understanding that all of us at some point need a second chance. Mrs. Jenkins had given me mine. Maybe it was my turn to pass that kindness forward. The next day, I called Mr. Oliver and arranged an interview for Frank. He was hired a week later. It wasn't the dream job, but it was dignified and paid enough for him to rent a small apartment in town, closer to the children. In the following months, I noticed a change in Tony and Celeste. They began to see their father more frequently. He would pick them up on Sundays, take them for outings, help Tony with math homework, attend Celeste's school presentations. He was trying, in his way, to make up for the years of absence. One afternoon, Celeste returned from an outing with her father, particularly excited. "Mom, Dad said he's going to take me to see the city during vacation. He said there's a huge museum there with paintings by famous artists." I smiled, happy to see her enthusiasm. "That's wonderful, honey. It will be a special trip." "He's different, isn't he?" she asked, with that sharp perception she always had, even so young. "More present, more of a father." "People change, Celeste. Sometimes for the better, sometimes not. The important thing is that he's trying to be a good father to you and your brother now." She nodded thoughtfully before running to tell the news to her brother. That night, sitting on the porch of my house, watching the stars that dotted the dark sky, I reflected on how much my life had changed in that decade. From the young, abandoned wife to the respected businesswoman, from the woman who cried in hiding to the strong mother who raised 2 children with determination, from the fear of the future to the confidence in the path I had chosen. And to think that it all started with an "I'll sleep on the couch" repeated night after night, and a feminine laugh heard in a dark backyard. That moment of pain had been the beginning of a journey that led me exactly where I needed to be. Life is like that, my dear friends. Sometimes what seems to be our end is just the beginning of a much more beautiful story than we could have imagined. The 90s arrived, bringing winds of change. My atelier was no longer a small business. It had transformed into a reference of quality throughout the region. Now, with almost 15 years of existence, it employed 6 seamstresses, besides Nancy, who had become my manager and right-hand woman. We had clients who traveled even from other states to order special dresses. In 1992, I made a decision that would again change the course of my business. I visited a fashion fair in the city and was enchanted by the wedding dresses I saw there. Sophisticated designs, imported fabrics, finishes I had never seen before. I returned home with my head buzzing with ideas. Why not create my own collection of wedding dresses? Not just made to order, as I had been doing until then, but ready pieces that brides could try on and adapt. Investing in this idea meant a considerable financial risk. I would need to buy expensive fabrics in quantity, hire more specialized seamstresses, expand the space of the atelier. I sat down with Tony, who at 24 was already in his 3rd year of medical school, to discuss the viability of the plan. "Mom, I've never seen you back down from a challenge," he told me, analyzing the numbers I had carefully noted. "If you believe it can work, then go ahead. Remember what you always told me when I was afraid to try something new? You already have the no, now go in search of the yes." I smiled, hearing my own words coming back to me through my son. That boy who once cried for his father's absence now was a sensible man, determined, about to become a doctor, and he was right. I had never backed down from life's challenges. Why would I start now? With the help of a bank loan that the manager approved without hesitation, given the successful history of the atelier, I began the expansion. I rented the entire building, where before we occupied only 2 rooms. We renovated everything, creating a spacious and elegant space with comfortable fitting rooms, a showroom for the ready dresses, and an exclusive area for personalized service. The inauguration of the new space, now called Elaine's Maison, Brides and Haute Couture, was an event in the town. The mayor attended, as well as several local personalities. Even the city newspaper sent a reporter to cover the story of the seamstress who became a successful businesswoman. Among the guests, to my surprise, was Frank. He had established himself as a reliable driver in the trucking company, had managed to buy a small house in the outskirts of town, and maintained a closer relationship with our children. When I saw him timidly enter the salon, wearing his best suit, a bit out of fashion but well cared for, I felt an unexpected emotion. "I came to congratulate you," he said, handing me a small bouquet of daisies, the same simple flowers he had given me when he asked for my hand in marriage so many years ago. "You've built something amazing, Elaine. I'm proud to have been part of your life, even if it wasn't in the way it should have been." I thanked him with a sincere smile. The resentment I once felt for him had transformed into a serene acceptance of the past. After all, if I hadn't heard that laugh in that backyard so many years ago, perhaps I would never have discovered my own strength, my own worth. The new concept of the atelier was an immediate success. Soon, we had to establish a scheduling system for fittings, as the salon was always full of future brides. My creations began to appear in specialized magazines. A fashion magazine from the city did a 4-page article about the small-town designer who is revolutionizing the wedding dress market. In 1994, at 47 years old, I received an invitation I could never have imagined to participate as an exhibitor at a bridal fashion fair in New York. It was the chance to show my work to a much larger audience, to meet international suppliers, to expand the business even more. The decision wasn't easy. I had never been so far from home, from my routine. Celeste, at 21 years old, was studying education at the State University and came home on weekends. She was the one who encouraged me the most. "Mom, you need to go. It's the opportunity of your life. I'll come home during that week. Keep an eye on everything." I'll help Nancy with whatever is needed. And so, with a mixture of anxiety and excitement, I left for New York with a selection of my best dresses. The fair was in a huge exhibition center, with exhibitors from all over the country and even from other countries. My booth was small compared to those of the big fashion houses, but I arranged it with all my affection, highlighting the best I had. On the first day, few people stopped to look. I was an unknown there, without the renown of the famous brands. But on the second day, a journalist from a bridal magazine was enchanted by one of my dresses, a model with handmade lace applications, inspired by the tablecloths my grandmother embroidered. She took several photos, interviewed me at length, wanting to know how a seamstress from a small town had gotten that far. I told my story without omitting anything. The young marriage, the discovered betrayal, the early morning when I heard that laugh that changed my destiny, the struggle to raise my children alone, the learning with Mrs. Jenkins, the gradual construction of my business. She listened, fascinated, noting every detail. "Your story is extraordinary, Mrs. Elaine," she said at the end. "It's a story of overcoming that will inspire many women." The article came out in the next issue of the magazine with the title, "From Tears to Dreams: The Seamstress Who Transformed Pain into Art." It was an instant success. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Stores wanting to resell my pieces, brides wanting exclusivity, other journalists wanting interviews. I had to hire a secretary just to manage all the contacts. The following year, I opened a small branch in the state capital. Celeste, who had finished college, decided to postpone her plans to teach to help me in the administration of the new store. "I want to learn the business with you, Mom," she told me. "I want to continue your legacy." Those words filled me with pride. Seeing my daughter, who grew up watching me work tirelessly, now wanting to follow in my footsteps, was one of the greatest rewards I could receive. Tony graduated in medicine in 1996, specializing in pediatrics. He decided to return to our town instead of staying in the city, as many colleagues did. "I want to care for the children here, Mom. Many have never seen a pediatrician in their lives." His office, opened with my financial help, soon became a reference in the region. He attended many patients for free, especially those who came from the poorer rural areas. In 1998, at 51 years old, I received news that would once again change the course of my life. Frank had suffered a stroke while driving. Luckily, he was parked at the time, waiting to make a delivery. He was quickly helped and taken to the hospital, where Tony, as the town's doctor, ended up taking care of him. "He will survive, Mom," my son told me on the phone, "but he will be left with some sequelae. Partial paralysis on the left side, difficulty speaking. He will need care." Frank had no one. The son he had with Debbie, now 14 years old, lived far away with his mother and stepfather. They hadn't been in contact for years. His parents had already passed away and his brothers lived far away. He was alone at a time when he most needed help. It was Celeste who suggested the unthinkable. "He could stay in the back room of the house, Mom, the one we use to store old things. We can clean it, put a bed, adapt it for someone with mobility difficulties." I looked at my daughter, surprised. "You suggest that your father come live with us after everything?" She shrugged with that wisdom that always seemed beyond her age. "He's our father, Mom. He made mistakes, yes, and hurt us a lot. But in recent years, he tried to redeem himself. He was there when we needed him. Now he needs us." Tony agreed. "It would be easier for me to monitor his recovery if he were nearby, and hiring a full-time nurse would be very expensive." And so, almost 25 years after I left home with 2 small children, after discovering Frank's betrayal, he returned to the family fold, not as a husband, but as a patient, a father who needed care. We adapted the back room, as Celeste suggested. We installed support bars, a hospital bed that Tony got from the hospital, a comfortable armchair by the window that faced the garden. We hired a caretaker for the mornings when we were all away from home. In the afternoon, I myself took over the care when I returned from the atelier. At first, it was strange to have Frank back in the family's daily life. He was changed, not just physically by the illness, but as a person. There was a genuine humility in him, a sincere gratitude for each small gesture of care. The arrogance that characterized him in the mill days had completely disappeared. "I don't deserve this, Elaine," he told me one afternoon, his voice slurred by the facial paralysis as I changed the sheets on his bed. "I don't deserve so much kindness after what I did to you." I stopped what I was doing and looked at him, at the man I once loved, who made me suffer so much, but who also gave me 2 wonderful children and inadvertently pushed me onto a path of independence and fulfillment. "I'm not doing this for you, Frank. I'm doing it for our children who want to take care of their father, and for myself as well. I learned a long time ago that holding grudges only poisons the one who holds it, never the one who deserves it." He nodded, his eyes welling up. "You were always an extraordinary woman, Elaine. I realized it too late." As the months passed, Frank's health gradually improved. The physical therapy was working, and he could already walk short distances with the help of a cane. His speech was also clearer. Gradually, he became part of the house routine, dining with us at the kitchen table, watching television with Celeste on nights when she didn't go out, talking with Tony about his patients when he came to visit us. In 2000, upon completing 30 years of the atelier, now a true empire of bridal fashion with 3 stores and more than 40 employees, I decided to pass the main management to Celeste, who had revealed herself to be a talented administrator. I would continue working, of course, creating new models, supervising production, but I wanted more time for myself, to enjoy the life I had built with so much effort. It was also in this year that I received the most surprising proposal from Frank. "Elaine," he told me one afternoon when we were alone having coffee on the porch, "I know I have no right to ask this, but would you accept if we married again, not as husband and wife for real? I'm not suggesting that, but legally, so that I can leave everything I have to you when I'm gone." I was speechless for a moment. Of all the things I expected to hear from him, that was the last. "Frank, you don't need to do this. I don't need your inheritance. I have much more than I ever dreamed of having." He smiled, that crooked half-smile that the stroke had left. "It's not much, I know. The little house, some investments I made over the years, but it's my way of trying to compensate a little for what I took from you in the past." I looked at him for a long time. The man before me was no longer the attractive young man I fell in love with, nor the distant husband who betrayed me. He was an aged man, marked by life and illness, trying to make peace with his past. "Let's do something different," I finally suggested. "We don't need to get married again. You can leave whatever you want in a will to whoever you wish. And as for me and you, we can be friends. I think after all we've been through, that's what we are now. Old friends who shared a lifetime of stories, some sweet, others bitter." He nodded, his eyes welling up again. "Thank you, Elaine, for everything." In the years that followed, I found a peace that I never imagined possible. My business prospered in Celeste's competent hands. Tony had married a doctor he met in college, and they gave me 2 adorable grandchildren. Frank, although still with limitations, had become a constant and comforting presence in our house, helping as he could, telling stories to the grandchildren, advising Celeste on business based on his experience. And I continued creating, sewing, dreaming, but now with the serenity of someone who knows they transformed pain into beauty, abandonment into strength, despair into determination. Today, at 78 years old, I look back and see the complex embroidery that life has sewn. Each stitch, each knot, each mend, everything had its purpose. Even that night when I heard a laugh in the backyard, which at the time seemed like the end of the world, ended up being just the beginning of the true story I was destined to live. And you know, my dear friends, if there's one lesson I learned in this long journey, it's that sometimes it's precisely the greatest pains that push us toward the best paths. That "I'll sleep on the couch," repeated so many nights, was actually the first step toward my liberation. That laugh that hurt me so much was the sound that awakened me to my own strength. Life is like that. An intricate embroidery, where even the darkest stitches have their function, creating contrasts that make the final design even more beautiful and meaningful. And that's why I'm here today sharing my story with you, so that you know that no matter how much life seems to fall apart at one moment, it may just be making space for something much greater and more beautiful to be built. Thank you for listening to me until here. If you liked my story, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other stories like this one. Also, share with someone you think needs to hear this message of overcoming, and tell me in the comments what touched your heart the most in this story. I love reading what you write. Until next time, my dear friends.